My father died when I was 13. I was certain that my life had come to an end. And as I've looked back over that event over the years, I realized it was a defining moment in my life. Life as I had known it never was the same again. Our lives are full of those defining moments and events. Sometimes they are tragic, like the death of a parent, or a child, or a spouse, a sibling, a good friend, a lover, a boyfriend or girlfriend. Other times they are times of celebration, but nonetheless changing our lives, like the birth of a child or a grandchild. Sometimes it is starting a new job. Other times it is receiving news after years with the same company that you're being terminated. Sometimes it's news from the doctor that, yes, it's cancer. And other times it's after months of chemo and radiation, the news that you are now cancer-free. Sometimes it's a graduation. Sometimes it's retirement. Sometimes it's an accident. Sometimes they are the beginning of a relationship. Other times it's the end of one. A marriage, a divorce, a separation, a reunion. Sometimes these events are incredibly personal. Sometimes we share them as congregations. Sometimes we share them as communities. Sometimes we share them even as nations. And sometimes even worldwide. 9/11 was one of those events, as is COVID-19. Life as we once knew it has changed. It is one of those defining moments that we hear in the Abraham story this morning. As you remember, Abraham and Sarah were promised a child. Isaac was born, the child of promise, the child of laughter. And in this morning's chapter of the story, it all seems to have come to a grinding halt because God is asking for the life of Isaac. Sacrifice your only son, Abraham. Abraham takes Isaac up the Mount of Moriah, and there he prepares to sacrifice him before the Lord. He is about ready to plunge the knife into him when the Lord intervenes and provides a scapegoat, literally. And Abraham offers the ram instead of his son. This story really shakes up our 21st century ears with all its talk about child sacrifice. And yet in its day, that was a fairly common practice, as human sacrifice itself continues well past the time of Christ in many religious ceremonies. In fact, some scholars have argued that this story is in the Bible to explain why it is that Jews don't offer child sacrifice. That's one interpretation of the story. The other is to focus on Abraham's faith, a faith that would be willing to sacrifice it all for the sake of God. That's a little overwhelming for me. For that kind of faith seems impossible for me to conjure up. I think there's a third way of looking at this story, and that is, as we hear the story, those words, God will provide, pop up so many times in the course of that story. In fact, Abraham ends up naming the mountain God will provide. Perhaps the more interesting way, especially in these times that we're living through, is to look at this story as God will provide in the midst of our being tested and challenged by the events of our life. Many, many years ago, Dr. Alan Larson, now of beloved memory, gave me a gift. It came from one of his students who had done a pen and ink of one of the church stained glass windows. And under the window, it was inscribed with these words: "When God closes a door, God always opens a window." That's not in the Bible, though, by the way. But the sentiment is. It's the sentiment behind the story of Abraham and Sarah and the sacrifice of Isaac. God provided an alternative, even when the door seemed to slam. It will be, as we shall hear in the near future, the same is true of Jacob as he wrestles with God well into the night, or with Joseph, whose brothers sell him into slavery in Egypt, or Moses and the people of Israel as they sojourn in the wilderness on their way to the promised land, or those exiles in Babylon who wait to go home. But perhaps for most of us, the most compelling story of closing doors and opening windows is the story of Jesus, his death and resurrection. It's an interesting connection between our story this morning and that story. For there are only two places in the Bible that use the term "only beloved son." The first is with regards to Isaac, and the second with regards to Jesus. Isaac is the sacrifice of the only begotten son that doesn't happen. And through it, new life is given. On the other hand, it is Jesus' death, the sacrifice offered, that gives us new life through his death and his resurrection. His coming to life again instills in us new life and new hope in the midst of closing doors and opening windows. It is not hard for us to imagine closing doors these days. So many have slammed in our faces over the course of these last few months, things that will never be the same again. And we've already seen signs of opening windows, some incredible changes, some innovative and creative ways of doing things in our world that we never dreamed of, but are now becoming daily practices. It seems very easy and very hopeful. The door is closed, the window's open, let's go. But I don't know about you, I find myself going back to that door and pounding on it quite a bit these days, just in the hope that maybe God will change his mind and the door will open and we can all go back to being the way we once were back in 2019. I know it's not going to happen, but still I try. And there are days I go to that open window and look with such hope at visions and dreams, expectations. There's sometimes I go to the window and I look down and go, oh my God, that's a long way down. That would hurt if I fell. And so I say, somewhere between the door and the window, I think most of us are there, searching, caught between that definitive moment and what is yet to come. It is why it's so important that God continues to gather us together as the faithful, that we may encourage one another in our vision, and in our boldness, and in our courage, knowing that we do not walk this walk alone, but that God goes with us. Not only has he opened a window, but he promises to walk through that window with us. For God will provide for all that we need. In all our grief and fear we turn to you. O God, you know all that we think or do. You know the pain we put each other through. Lord, have mercy. Christ, have mercy. Lord, grant us peace. Help us to put aside the angry word, the clenching fist, the wish and will to hurt. Teach us the way in which love best is served. Lord, have mercy. Christ, have mercy. Lord, grant us peace. You did not even spare your only Son. He lived our griefs and bore all evil done. But through his cross redemption has been won. Lord, have mercy. Christ, have mercy. Lord, grant us peace. God, when we suffer all that we can bear, then let us know that you in truth are near, and will not leave us lost in all our fear. Lord, have mercy. Christ, have mercy. Lord, grant us peace.